Before there was a Roman Empire drunk on conquest and self-mythology, before Caesar carved his name into the stone of history, before the Mediterranean world decided that civilization had a single address, there was a woman sitting on a throne in the Nile Valley, stamping her authority onto gold and bronze, minting coins that declared to every merchant, every traveler, and every rival power, "We were here, we were sovereign, and we built this." That woman was a Kandake, a queen of ancient Kush, and what she did more than 2,000 years ago still matters today. It matters to every black child who has ever been handed a history book that begins their story in chains. It matters to every African diaspora community that has been told their ancestors contributed nothing of lasting value to human civilization. It matters because the lie of African inferiority was never accidental. It was manufactured, it was maintained, and it was designed to serve a purpose. But lies, no matter how carefully constructed, cannot survive the weight of evidence forever. The coins are real. The queens were real. The civilization was real. And knowing that truth is not merely an academic exercise, it is an act of reclamation, a declaration of inheritance, and a refusal to accept a diminished version of who you are and where you come from. The Kingdom of Kush, also known as Nubia, occupied the region stretching along the Nile River south of ancient Egypt, encompassing what is now modern Sudan and part of Ethiopia. This was not a peripheral civilization clinging to the edges of greatness. This was one of the longest-running and most sophisticated kingdoms in the entire ancient world, spanning roughly 3,000 years of continuous cultural and political development. At its height, Kush controlled Egypt itself, producing the 25th dynasty of Egyptian pharaohs, the so-called Black Pharaohs who ruled the most powerful civilization on earth from approximately 744 BCE to 656 BCE. But the story we are focused on here reaches into the Meroitic period, roughly 300 BC to 350 CE, when the capital of the Kushite kingdom had moved south to the magnificent city of Meroe, a metropolis of iron smelting, monumental architecture, and international trade. It is within this Meroitic period, around 200 BC, that the institution of the Kandake, the Queen Mother or ruling queen, reached its most powerful and documented expression. The title Kandake, from which the Greek writers derived the name Kandos, was not merely ceremonial. These women were commanders, legislators, diplomats, and in at least one recorded case, battlefield generals. The specific Kandakes who oversaw the minting of Kushite coinage operated within a monetary system that placed Meroe firmly within the economic networks of the ancient world. While Rome in this same period was still transitioning from a barter-heavy economy and only beginning to standardize its coinage, the Roman denarius was not introduced until approximately 211 BC, and widespread monetary adoption took generations beyond that. Nubian queens were already embedding their iconography, their names, and their royal authority into metal currency. Coins recovered from the Meroitic period bear images of queens depicted with powerful, full-figured bodies, tripolurious headdresses, and weaponry in hand. These were not decorative portraits. These were political statements minted in metal, circulated across trade routes that stretched from sub-Saharan Africa to the Red Sea coast and into the Mediterranean world. The deliberate suppression of Nubian and Kushite history is one of the most sustained acts of intellectual violence in the modern era. It did not happen by accident. It happened through a series of calculated decisions made by European colonial scholars, archaeologists, and historians beginning primarily in the 18th and 19th centuries, when the justification of African enslavement and colonization required an ideological foundation. That foundation demanded that Africa be portrayed as a continent without history, without philosophy, without statecraft, and without innovation. Any evidence to the contrary had to be minimized, misattributed, or outright erased. The great temples at Meroe, when encountered by European travelers, were frequently described as the work of Egyptians, or of mysterious outside influences, rather than the indigenous African civilization that built them. The Meroitic script, a fully developed writing system used by the Kushite people, was dismissed as undecipherable and therefore unimportant for decades, even as scholars devoted enormous resources to other ancient scripts. It was only in the 20th century that serious academic effort was invested in its partial decipherment, and even today it remains incompletely understood, not because of its inherent complexity, but because of the centuries of neglect imposed upon it. The Greek historian Strabo wrote about a candidate who fought Roman forces with ferocity, yet even this account was filtered through a lens of outsider fascination rather than genuine respect. The Roman general Petronius encountered Kushite forces around 24 BCE and was reportedly forced into a negotiated peace, a remarkable outcome given Rome's military ambitions in the region, yet this episode appears in most Western history curricula as a footnote at best, or is omitted entirely. The pyramids of Meroe, of which there are more than 200, more pyramids than exist in all of Egypt, were barely known to the general public for most of the 20th century. The Sudanese archaeologist and scholar Ahmed El-Taib focused much of his career on reversing this neglect, and Sudanese scholars and historians have fought for generations to restore Kushite history to its rightful place. Meanwhile, the colonial era looting of Meroitic artifacts meant that many of the most significant objects from this civilization now sit in European museums, physically separated from the communities whose ancestors created them. What survived the centuries of suppression, neglect, and colonial plunder is extraordinary in its breadth and stubbornness. The physical landscape of the Nile Valley in modern Sudan still bears witness to the scale of Kushite civilization. The pyramids at Meroe, at Nuri, at El Kourou, these structures still rise from the desert floor, steeper and more numerous than their Egyptian counterparts, a testament to an architectural tradition that was distinctly, unapologetically Nubian. The site of Meroe itself, designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2011, preserves the ruins of temples, palace complexes, and the remains of iron smelting furnaces that made Meroe one of the ancient world's premier iron-producing centers. Iron technology from the Meroitic kingdom spread southward and westward across Africa, seeding agricultural and metallurgical traditions that shaped the continent's development for millennia. The Meroitic script, though not yet fully deciphered, survives on hundreds of inscriptions, stelae, and funerary objects, representing a written tradition entirely independent of Egyptian hieroglyphics. Scholars have determined its phonetic values even if the language itself remains largely unread, an astonishing library waiting to be fully opened. The art of the Kandake period has survived in painted reliefs, bronze objects, and ceramic traditions that show a visual language deeply